Talk 1240.
I love NASCAR.
Looking at the headlines today, and they are brutal. If you're looking at what's happening in political news right now, you know that there have been a few women who have come out saying that Donald Trump has sexually abused them in one way or another. To some people, this is not surprising at all. To other people, this is the shock of the century. So there are a lot of different perspectives on what exactly is happening here with the whole Donald Trump narrative, and I want to kind of break it down. And I think Donald Trump has something similar with another politician, and this might be a comparison you may not have heard of. This is Best Shot here on Hot News Talk Radio. This is your show where you can call in at any point during the show at all that you ever want to. It's 423-800-8949. That's 423-800-8949. You are always welcome to call in here on Best Shot, because we welcome your calls here. We're not one of those mamby-pamby, we're afraid of the audience shows where they're all, oh no, what if someone calls and says something I disagree with? We're not like that here, especially not at Hot News Talk Radio. We are very pro-dissenting opinion. After all, this station basically is the dissenting opinion station. Everyone here believes something different. And everyone here believes something different from the other people here. And that's cool. We're all about that. And that's one of the things that makes our station awesome. We're totally cool with people disagreeing with us, and even here within our ranks, we don't agree with everything that the other person says, and that's okay, because we believe in your right to say what you want to say and believe what you want to believe. That's what you can do here in America, and that's what you can do here on Best Shot. 423-800-8949. That's 423-800-8949. I think Donald Trump has a similarity with a particular political candidate. In fact, he ran for president in the last election, and I think Donald Trump has a lot of similarities with this particular guy. This is coming out on Fox News, saying somehow the election was supposed to reflect the public's anger at the broken political system. Now it's morphed into whether Donald Trump or Bill Clinton has a more disreputable character when it comes to women. The latest batch of allegations against Trump, carried by the New York Times and People magazine, puts the issue of sexual misconduct front and center, and little else will be able to break through the static. Forget taxes and terrorism, they say. The transformation into a tabloid campaign is now complete. And that's absolutely correct. But the transition to a tabloid campaign happened, I think, a little bit longer ago than the folks here at Fox seem to think. It became a tabloid election basically as soon as Trump got in, because they knew he was going to be a free radical. They had to take him out as any way possible. You have to remember, Republicans don't seem to like Trump very much. They're jumping on the we don't actually stand with Trump bandwagon as quickly as they can. There are a lot of Republicans who do not stand with Donald Trump. He is very much a polarizing character in American politics. You have to remember that. He's not a monolithic, we all as Republicans agree with him. And I'm saying that as a non-Republican. We all agree with him, right? That's what we're expected to hear from the Republican Party when it comes to their presidential candidate. For instance, when it came to Bush, when Bush was running, you didn't hear any Republicans, as far as I know, saying, we don't stand with Bush. Bush does things that we don't like, so we can't stand with Bush. Bush was so establishment, it was crazy. And basically every candidate ever has been so establishment, it's been crazy. With maybe the exception of Ronald Reagan, although he did some things I don't necessarily agree with, too. I think overall he was pretty good, just not, entirely, but no president is, and no one personally ever is. There are things Bill Clinton did that I thought were okay, and there were things Bill Clinton did that I thought were absolutely abhorrent too. So that's how it goes with any president and any political candidate for really any office too. So it just goes by, what you think about that particular person. But Donald Trump is more polarizing than I think any of those people, because people might say, well, I don't like George Bush's policies, but he seems like an all right guy. Or, I don't think George Bush is a very good guy, but his political policies I can get behind. George Bush is a very inoffensive president, and Obama has been a very inoffensive president for the most part. But Donald Trump doesn't seem to really care about any of that. He's all for being the offensive president. He's all for being loud and bombastic. He reminds me a lot of Teddy Roosevelt, and that's not necessarily a good thing, but that's who he reminds me of. So this presidential candidate, Donald Trump, reminds me a lot, though, of Herman Caine. Now, not in beliefs necessarily, but he reminds me a lot of Herman Caine in just how the smear campaigns have been working. Because Herman Caine, I think, was a good candidate for president. His 999 plan was interesting anyway, even if he didn't get to implement it, which he wouldn't have. Presidents don't usually get to do that. It still would have been nice to have someone who was an actual business person who could actually get in office, who would actually do things for, the little people, you might say. He seemed like a great guy, Herman Caine. But then you had all these allegations that came out saying Herman Caine was, he sexually abused me when I worked for him. And that's not very good. That's not something that any candidate for anything wants to have on their record. Herman Caine violated me sexually is not something that you want to have on your resume. And Herman Caine definitely didn't want that to show up in the papers. Unfortunately for him, it did. And unfortunately for him, it pretty much ruined his presidential campaign. That and a few other factors basically ruined any hopes he had of ever being elected president. It was basically over for him at that point. So unfortunately, that's how that worked out for Herman Caine. And the same thing is happening now to Donald Trump, where Donald Trump has done bombastic things. Yeah. He's done controversial things. Yeah. But so far, his past, for the most part, has been not squeaky clean, but it's been free of any forcible, unwanted sexual relations, as far as we know. That's not come up at all. But now it seems to be popping up all the dang time. It seems like all you hear about now is Donald Trump abused me in one way or another. Donald Trump was doing bad things to me that I didn't want him to do. That seems to be the big thing that's in the news now. That's all we can hear about is what Donald Trump has been doing to people against their will. That is not by accident. I can tell you that much. Now, even if, and I'm not saying they're not, but even if the allegations are true, still the release of them has to be strategic. Even if the news outlets just got them, the release is still strategic because this is coming up now on the November election. We're in October. The election's in just a few days. We're just a little ways away from the November election. So talking about these allegations coming out it seems to be a little bit, strategically convenient, to say the least. And the same thing, like I say, happened to Herman Caine. And I hope the same thing doesn't happen to Donald Trump in the sense of him having to pull out. I don't think it will. But it seems like it's pointing towards that happening. Not of him dropping out, but of his campaign being ruined as a result. Now, that could happen and it could not happen. It's too early to tell at this point. But right now, the election is still kind of too close to call. The third parties have had a lot of support. And I think that one thing could be said that we can mostly agree with is these two candidates who are running right now are probably the most unpopular candidates we've had in a while. Just the two candidates. Not that Donald Trump is unpopular with Republicans or Hillary Clinton is unpopular with Democrats. It's regular people who don't necessarily prescribe to either party. They are both not very popular. I mean, how often do you see on Facebook and on Twitter people talking about how both choices are bad? I've never seen that kind of thing ever in any other election that I've ever read about or taken part in. I've never seen anything about both candidates being seen as equally bad or both equally bad choices. It's astounding, but that's actually a lot of the sentiment that we're seeing now from people who are possible voters. So I think that I could be fair in saying these are two of the most unpopular candidates who are running right now. And I think the reason is people are just jaded. People are burned out on this whole campaign election nonsense. We're just burned out on it. And it kind of makes sense, actually, when you think about it, because the election so far has been just mudslinging back and forth, essentially. There has not been a whole lot of policy talking about or talked about or anything, really. It's just mudslinging back and forth, which gets pretty tiresome pretty quickly. But aside from that, the two candidates don't really seem to have solid plans for a lot of things. And I'm not just talking about immigration. We all know where they stand on immigration. But what about things like cybersecurity, where Clinton obviously doesn't know too much about cybersecurity because she leaked all those emails, or rather she kept all those emails on her own private server. So that's illegal, and it's also not very tech savvy. So obviously she doesn't know much about cybersecurity. Donald Trump, being a business person, might know about cybersecurity, but his view of hackers seems to be a little bit outdated or just wrong in general. But again, both of these people will get cabinet members when and if they get elected. So there's that to think about too. This whole election has been the biggest mess I've ever seen in terms of politics. I was talking to a very interesting guy yesterday, really interesting fellow, who was on the David Tulis show, and we were talking about this election, and he said that he thinks that history sort of follows 50-year cycles. And he was saying how this election, he was around the 60s, he said this election and this political climate reminds him a lot of the 1960s. Just how people are so up and rowdy about the people who are up for office right now, the people who are polarized between one or the other. They are vehemently polarized between one candidate or the other. Where if you're a Hillary Clinton supporter, you just can't understand how anyone could ever like Donald Trump. And if you're a Donald Trump supporter, you just can't understand how anyone could ever like Hillary Clinton. And it makes sense. I lean more towards Trump, although I'm not a diehard fan of his. I'll put it that way, just so you know my personal position. I'm not a diehard fan of Trump, but I also don't think he would be the worst choice out of the two. You know, if someone held a gun to my head tomorrow and said, you have to choose Clinton or Trump, I'd choose Trump, and it wouldn't be that difficult. But in terms of conscientiously voting for either candidate, I'm still not exactly sure about that. It seems a little bit iffy, we'll put it that way. But there's something that Spurgeon said that I've always kind of liked. One of Spurgeon, is a very popular, very, very, very popular theologian. If you're an evangelical, you probably heard of Spurgeon at some point. But one of his things that he always said that I always liked was, if you're given the choice between the lesser two evils, just choose neither. And that seems to probably be the better option, because it's sort of to put it in cruder terms, you're screwed either way. You know, with either candidate, in some regard, you're screwed either way. Clinton's going to screw you over in this way, and Trump's going to do it in another way. So either candidate is going to have pluses and minuses, and basically you just have to pick which one you want. Do you want a pathological liar in office who is also going to have at least strong, how should I put this? She's going to be well recognized in the international community. Or do you want to have someone who's going to have pretty solid policy, but he's going to have gaffes all the time, and he's going to be seen as possibly a joke in the international community? It's sort of a trade-off there between policy and international relations. And Clinton, we know, is all about international relations. Did you see that speech that was leaked the other day? I'm not sure if it was leaked, but it was a speech that was released anyway. The other day, she was talking to bankers about how she wants a hemispheric economic cooperation. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all for economic cooperation between different countries. I think it's great that we can have countries which cooperate together and operate together well, and in general are able to trade between each other. But I don't think that these relationships should be decided by politicians with 10-year agreements. It just doesn't seem like a very good idea, especially when these agreements are made in secret, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership was, where we didn't get to see what was in it until after it came out. That sounds a little bit shady, don't you think? Just a tad bit shady. And that's a bipartisan thing, by the way. That's not a Republicans and Democrats thing. That's a bipartisan thing. And that's how most things are when it comes to politics. We like to talk about how things are divided along party lines, but really they're not. There are a few issues which are, but most are not. For instance, you have gun control, where most Democrats are very much pro-gun control, although some are not. And Republicans are pretty much anti-gun control, but some are pro-gun control. They'll call it common sense gun control, right? Common sense gun policy, where it's just common sense, apparently, that certain people can't have certain guns or something like that. I've never understood what the common sense was, which means I guess it's not common sense if most people I know don't actually have any sound definition of what the common sense solution is. Isn't that kind of necessary for a common sense solution to have, a common sense of what the solution should be? But no, we'll just call it that so it sounds like it's not a very offensive thing. This is common sense gun control. We're not taking your guns away. We're just taking away your ability to use most of them. That's common sense gun control. And a lot of Republicans and Democrats both are for what they'll call common sense gun control, but they'll vary on definition of what common sense actually is. You have to understand what the politicians' goals are, though. And this is where the national versus local argument comes in, because I don't think that this election matters as much as people say it does. I think this election is, for the most part, a distraction from what's happening here locally. Look at our cities right now. Look at our local communities. A lot of things are kind of falling apart with our local communities here. For instance, here in Chattanooga, we have a very bad gang problem. But instead, I guess we'll worry about Trump versus Clinton because that's more important. No, really, though, think about it. We have a very bad gang problem here in Chattanooga. And remember, it wasn't too long ago, within my lifetime, and that's not that long ago, within my lifetime, they denied there was a gang problem in Chattanooga. You had a sheriff who denied there was a gang problem in Chattanooga. And that wasn't that long ago. And now we keep talking about how we have a gang problem that's getting worse and worse and worse, and it's on par with larger cities. It's not as bad as Atlanta, but it's getting there. So we talk about the gang problem like it's this thing that's been around forever, but it wasn't that long ago they were denying it was even there. So which is it? Obviously, the politicians and the sheriffs back then didn't really know what they were talking about. Either that or they're lying to appease the people, which seems much more likely. It is Hamilton County after all. But the interesting thing is, we're much more worried about this national election than we are about our local gang problem or the issue of maybe police reform in one way or another, or the sheriff's election, if you looked at who might be running for sheriff next season. Or what about the local election? Larry Groen is running for mayor. Chris Long is running for mayor. Mayor Andy Burke is running for mayor as an incumbent. These are important elections that are actually going to affect us here, right? These elections are going to affect you if you live or commute through Chattanooga. Now, I personally live in Catoosa County, so Hamilton County elections actually do kind of affect me, but I can't vote in them. So I'm put in kind of that awkward situation. And voting in Catoosa County elections seems to be an effort in futility because the same people get in every single year. Every single year or period of years, you get basically exactly the same people in office every single cycle in Catoosa County, because that's how Catoosa County works. We have the good old boy system. But Hamilton County, a little bit different, a lot more metropolitan. That's why you have the Chattanooga metropolitan area, right? These elections matter. But the ones where we talk about presidents, I kind of don't feel like those matter nearly as much. Because the president, yeah, can affect things. He affects the public face of the country. He affects how we feel about the country. But I'd say the country itself is not nearly as important as your locale. Because, yeah, a country is important. It's a region, right? It's like Europe is important for Europeans. But Europe as a whole should not be as important to Europeans as, say, Hungary or France, or to put it more specifically, Burgundy or Budapest. Those places should be important to people who live in those places. And for us, the Chattanooga greater metropolitan area should be important to us, or maybe Bradley County, Cleveland, if you live there. That should be important to us. And that should be many steps ahead in our mind, many steps ahead of the presidential election. These things matter. These things affect us directly. And yeah, I'm not saying don't vote in the presidential election. You can do that. But you have to understand we need to allocate our mental resources correctly here. I'm not saying the presidential election doesn't matter, although I have my suspicions. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm saying it doesn't matter as much as the local election, but people tend to forget that around here. Now, Chattanooga has a great benefit that a lot of other cities don't have, which is this. Chattanoogans especially are very locally minded. Think about all the different restaurants and all the different people who live there who really truly care about locally sourcing, say, their food, or locally sourcing as much commodity as they can. We care about locally sourced items. David Tulis on his show, he was just on from 9 to 11, and I would encourage you to listen to him every week if you can, every day if you can, every weekday from 9 to 11. He's talking about something interesting, and he always talks to different farmers, and I always value those farmers. Now, I couldn't do farming. Let me just tell you that outright. Farming is not for me. Now, I might, marry someone 30 years down the road who says, I want to start a farm, and then I'll get into it. But right now, farming is not for me. It's going outside, for one, is not for me. And being anywhere near animals which are larger than me are not for me. These things are not things which I appreciate very much for myself, which makes me value people who do it even more, because I'm a computer guy, right? I play on computers. That's my job, basically. I mess around on computers. I edit audio. I talk into a microphone, and sometimes I lift very heavy boxes and put them on racks and things. That's my job, and I love my job. I'm not a farmer. I couldn't do that. I could if I really wanted to, but I don't, so I'm not. I'll leave that to the farmers. We need to value those people. Those people we should think of much more highly even than I'd say the president, because these people are actually feeding you. Whether we think about it or not, but if everyone stopped farming, we'd all die. If no one was president, I don't think it would matter that much. So we need to care about these people who are actually really affecting our lives. Let's put some thought towards who's actually affecting our lives here. It's not the politician in Washington nearly as much as it is the guy down the street who has a local shop that you go to every day. That guy, you'd care if he disappeared. If Barack Obama disappeared, if Clinton disappeared, if Trump disappeared, would we really care that much? Probably not. So that's why local is so much more important than national, because local actually affects us. Local is something that we can all rally behind. And it doesn't matter who you are. That's the other important thing about local economy. You can be black, white, Latino, if that's even a thing. You can be Native American. It doesn't matter. You can be whoever you want, rich, poor. It doesn't matter. We all can play a part in the local economy, and we all can do it consensually, right? We all do it by agreement, voluntarily. We're not forced into it by government. We're not forced into it by mutual agreements or pacts or anything like that. We do it because we want to, because we volunteer to, because we agree to, voluntarily. That's what makes a cohesive, strong economy, not international agreements and policymakers. This is Best Shot here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240, hotnewstalkradio.com. Number to call in is 423-800-8949. That's 423-800-8949 here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240, hotnewstalkradio.com, and noogaradio.com too. Like us on Facebook. We got a lot of great content on Facebook, exclusive live streams. That's facebook.com. Search for Hot News Talk Radio. Hot 1240 Hot News Talk Radio with your Hot News Now update. A home invasion is something that most gun owners train for but never expect to actually happen to them. But when Charles Sledge from Sunrise Drive heard a noise inside of his house, he pulled a gun and went in. Ryan Megan Francis was sitting at his kitchen table. According to his testimony, Mr. Sledge held a gun on her until police arrived. The woman said that she thought the house was abandoned, and she said she had been chased into it by another woman. She's now in jail, charged with aggravated burglary. Trouble at the Cancun's on Market Street when a man apparently a gas pump and began beating it with a tire iron. He beat several others as well, according to the manager of that store. He then picked up a gas canister, poured gasoline in front of a dumpster, lit it on fire, and sped away in his Jeep. He's been arrested and charged with setting fire to personal property and vandalism. 35-year-old Thomas Williams was sitting in his parked car when he was shot in the face by an unknown assailant. He apparently drove himself to a nearby fire station where he was then taken to a hospital by EMS. Police are still trying to find two suspects on the loose. It was going on in the Tennessee Valley. It's going on Hot 1240 Hot News Talk Radio.
Truex Jr. is off the pace and he is headed to the pit lane. Elliott powers around the outside. Michael McDowell pops the right front tire. Here's Martin Truex to the bottom. Blaney blocks him off too. Meanwhile, Chase Elliott went 4 wide on the back straightaway. They're side by side for the lead.
Hear it live on Chattanooga's official NASCAR radio station.
Hot News Talk 1240.
The voice of NASCAR. Cash, 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 and more cash. Rick Davis has the cash when you sell gold, silver, diamonds, rings, and jewelry. Sell Rick your precious metals today and lock in your price. Hey, Rick Davis will trade your cash for shiny, brilliant, and heavy gold. Gold cheaper now by $100 an ounce. Join the Rick Davis Silver Bonanza too. Prices so low, the Lone Ranger is bound to gallop in, Kimosabi.
Hey-ho, silver, away!
The markets are changing, so buy now. Cash, 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 and more cash for your silver and gold, gold, gold. Rick Davis, 5301 Brainerd Road. That's 5301 Brainerd Road. Rick Davis Gold and Diamonds. Oh, and cash, cash, cash. You know where it is.
Hey-ho, silver, away!
We're at the Cantina at Amigos Mexican Restaurant. Yes, sir. 2 orders of nachos with beef and beans, 2 beers. Chattanooga loves its Amigos restaurants, but the Amigos in Hickson has something extra. NASCAR, every race. How about a house wine? Really good. Big name beers, just tell Maria what you want. And here at Amigos, margaritas are popular, and it's only $3 all day. If you come here on a race day, Sunday, a Natty Light is only $2.25. Here at Amigos, just during NASCAR, Natty Light, $2.25. Amigos Mexican Restaurant in Hickson. The happy hour is 3 to 9 today and every day. I'd say the atmosphere is festive. Look at that huge TV. It's like being amid the fans under a bright sun, but no gasoline fumes, no heat. Stay cool. Quench your thirst. Amigos between Staples and Hobby Lobby. Take the next table to mine. Enjoy the NASCAR race with friend or family here at the Cantina at Amigos Mexican Restaurant. Okay, it's started.
Drivers, start your engines.
Hi, I'm Sabrina with Sabrina Realty Associates. Now is a great time to sell your home. In our area, inventory is at an all-time low, which translates into higher sales prices. Call us today at 423-499-7780 to set up a free consultation and discuss our unique and aggressive marketing programs. We will provide you with a free market analysis to determine the right value of your home. Call us today at 423-499-7780 or visit our website at sabrinarealty.com.
In the middle of our street.
Here's what advertisers are saying about AM 1240. HotNewsTalkRadio.com.
Radio station, they really care. They're always calling me probably once a week, checking on me, seeing how things going, see if they want to change any of the ads or do anything different, seeing what my needs are. Gotten business off the ads that you do for me, and seems to be working well at this point.
Prices were very fair. Areas in this town that we aren't able to get other ways, your radio station is able to help us out, and I really appreciate that.
We've been very pleased with the services we've got. It seems like everybody over there cares about what they're going to do, how it's going to work for us on this end. And we've been very impressed with the creativity of the ads that we've heard. And they always seem to be right on point, even without us having to come up with what's going to be said.
Been doing business with News Talk Radio for quite some time. It's the best place and the best value you can get for your advertisement. The commercials are great. They're very professional. I was actually blown away.
The commercial that they put together was awesome. It was way far above all the other radio stations we've dealt with. The best we've had yet, guarantee you, by far.
AM 1240 HotNewsTalkRadio.com gets results. Let us get results for your business. For a no obligation free consultation, call General Sales Manager Steve Johnson. Call 423-240-5459. That's 240-5459. Or you can always email Steve at NougaRadioSteve@gmail.com. That's NougaRadioSteve@gmail.com. AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. We get results.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
You know, when it comes to a air disaster, one thing that we always like is when there's someone there who can help. Air disaster, like someone has a heart attack or someone suffers from a seizure while on an airplane. These things are things that frighten everybody. You know, these are things that scare everybody, especially the person who's actually suffering from the event. But the old call of, is there a doctor in the house, can save somebody's life. And in this case, it did, except the flight attendants kind of got in the way. You may have seen this story in the news just recently. In-flight medical emergencies, according to RT.com, are always scary. But when one passenger on a Delta flight lost consciousness, Dr. Tamika Cross was fortunately on board. But the black doctor became too busy dealing with flight attendants skeptical that she was qualified to help. Dr. Cross witnessed the emergency on a Delta flight last weekend. Flight attendants issued a typical call for any physicians on board. However, when she raised her hand, the flight attendant allegedly said, "We are looking for actual physicians or nurses or some type of medical personnel. We don't have time to talk to you." Now, hold on. She's a doctor, though. Like, actually, Cross wrote about her experience with Delta on Sunday in a Facebook post that's been shared over 79,000 times. While flying from Detroit to Houston, Cross learned that a passenger 2 rows in front of her had become unresponsive. She says, "I naturally jumped into doctor mode as no one else was getting up," she wrote. "As I'm about to stand up, the flight attendant says, 'Everybody stay calm. It's just a night terror. He's all right.' The man became unresponsive again just a few minutes later, and the flight attendant yelled, 'Call ahead for a physician on board.' Cross raised her hand only to receive the response, 'Oh, no, sweetie,' and was told to put her hand down. She says, 'I tried to inform her that I was actually a physician, but I was continually cut off by condescending remarks,' she wrote. When the flight attendant made an official page for physicians, Cross said that she stared at the flight attendant as she went to press her button. The flight attendant was allegedly incredulous and demanded to see her credentials, asking about the type of doctor she was. Meanwhile, a man 2 seats in front of them was still being subjected to his medical emergency. Cross responded by explaining that she was an OBGYN resident and Detroit for a wedding. But believe it or not, they do have doctors in Detroit, she says. Now, you know, there's a lot that she's actually the chief resident obstetrician and gynecologist residents at Harris Health Lyndon B. Johnson Hospital, according to the New York Daily News. So, you know, that's pretty cool. She's got good credentials. She's obviously qualified. But for some reason, the flight attendant wasn't buying it. Now, is this a case of racial bias, or is this a case of just, I don't believe it because you don't look like a doctor? Not necessarily because of the color of your skin, but because you just don't look like a doctor right now? And it's an interesting question. But the bigger question, I think, is, are we becoming more potentially racially inflamed here in America? And I would say the answer is yes, because I've noticed over the course of my life here that there's a lot more racially charged incidents that have been happening. And maybe it's just the news is reporting on it more. But I've noticed that a lot, where there's a lot of issue that's been taken recently with, you've got the whole Black Lives Matter movement that's been going on. Say what you will about that. You've got the whole issue with this new movement saying that black people are being oppressed by the police outside of Black Lives Matter. There are other agencies which claim this too. And there's credence to those movements, and there's credence to that argument too. But I wonder if this is affecting not just the law enforcement community, but it's also making regular people more suspicious. I was talking to, again, someone who's going to be on the air on David Tulis' show. Before he was on the air, he was sitting in the front room. We were just chatting a little bit. And he was saying how, again, things are sort of going back to the 1960s in terms of just the election that's going on right now. It seems like the atmosphere, how people are reacting, it seems like people are becoming more and more afraid. They're becoming more and more fearful of people who are different from them. And I was thinking about how arguments about race work into the whole idea of local economy, because the local economy is not just shall we say, it's not just a economic thing, if that makes any sense. It's not just about money. Economy has a whole bunch of factors to it, and one of those factors is how people interact. It's very important that people can interact cordially without any issue. That's really kind of important to a functioning society, which means a functioning economy too. So a lot of the suspicion that we're seeing here, and a lot of the paranoia that we're seeing about people who are different from us. For me, I'm white, so that would be black people, right? I would be afraid of them if I were lesser minded, or perhaps if I grew up in a different environment, right? It's interesting though how that seems to be amplified nowadays, and maybe it's not just nowadays. Maybe I'm jaded, or maybe I'm just missing something. But it seems, if you notice and if you look carefully at what's happening in media, and if you look carefully at what's happening just in society, people are becoming more and more suspicious of each other, possibly without reason. But this is more and more increasingly a suspicious culture in general. And I think race is just a side effect of that. This racial tension we're seeing may just be a side effect of a bigger issue, which is just people are becoming more suspicious of other people for no discernible reason. And I'm not sure why that is, but if you look at media and if you look at how people are treating each other, that does seem to be the case, where we seem to be a lot more suspicious of other people just for indiscernible reasons. You seem to think that someone is deceiving you even if they're not. Most people, their first assumption when they're stopped by someone on the street is, this person's trying to get money out of me. Even if they're actually someone in need, we always think, they're just trying to get money out of me. That's the modern thought. That's how we think these days. And I wonder, again, is that a side effect of something bigger? Are we being subliminally trained by media to be suspicious of one another? I don't know, because I have no prior experience that would make me feel suspicious of really anyone who came up to me on the street, because all my experiences with people walking up to me on the street have been asking for directions. I've even had, this is actually kind of funny, I had a homeless guy ask me for directions one time. Well, I think he was homeless, but he was asking for directions and he smelled really bad, so I guess that's what he was. But he was asking for directions. I thought that was kind of odd. Like, don't you live here, dude? But whatever. I don't know. People are just becoming more and more suspicious of each other, and I'm wondering what the factors are for that. This is Best Shot here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240, hotnewstalkradio.com. And you can call in at 423-800-8949. That's 423-800-8949. You can listen to us anywhere in the world here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240, hotnewstalkradio.com, and noogaradio.com as well. That's noogaradio.com, where you can listen to us anywhere in the world here on Hot News Talk Radio. Now, Clinton's gotten in a lot of trouble. That's Bill Clinton's wife. She's gotten in a lot of trouble recently because of the whole email scandal thing. But there's been a new statement that she made that Fox has here. Clinton apparently says that she did not recall deleting any emails. The statement here is, Clinton does not recall ordering destruction of emails from personal server in testimony. Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton has said she does not recall ordering emails related to the State Department business to be deleted or permanently erased, from her personal server after she left her post in 2013, according to sworn testimony made public on Thursday, which is yesterday. The testimony obtained by the conservative group Judicial Watch marked the first time Clinton was forced to answer questions under oath about her email server, her private email system. A federal judge had ordered the former Secretary of State's legal team to turn over written responses to questions about the so-called homebrew server, which was kept in her New York home during her tenure as America's top diplomat. Clinton and her legal team objected to all or part of the 18 of the 25 questions put to her by Judicial Watch. She also filed 8 separate general objections to the process under which the questions are being asked. In her responses, Clinton used some variation of does not recall at least 21 times. Now, is she lying here? Or is she just really bad at remembering things? Because it could be one or the other nowadays. If you look at her health, it seems like it would be an easy assumption to make that she just doesn't remember anything. She seems to not have all of her marbles there, if that makes any sense. Like, she seems like she has moments where she's really sharp and she's the old Clinton that we're used to. And then she has these moments where it seems like she's just lost everything. She's just lost all of her memory suddenly, and she's sort of going into damage control mode where she's trying to make it appear that she knows what she's talking about. And we all have those moments. You know, everyone has a moment. We kind of call them senior moments. And if you're a younger person, you just call them a brain fart, you know, if you're familiar with that. That's what we call them. But it should only happen, you know, once a day or once a week, not several times in an interview. That's a little bit disturbing. But that's what's been happening to Clinton recently. In her responses, Clinton used some variation of does not recall at least 21 times. Now, that to me says that she doesn't just have a bad memory, she also is selectively forgetting things. Because it's easy to say you don't recall something because you don't really have to prove that you remember it or don't. You know, you say, I don't remember. How are you going to prove that you do or don't remember? They just sort of have to take that at face value. In her testimony, Clinton says that it was her expectation that all her work-related and potentially work-related emails had been turned over to the State Department by her lawyers when she determined that she had no reason to keep her personal emails. That statement contradicts testimony by FBI Director James Comey this past July. Comey told the House Oversight Committee that thousands of work-related emails were not returned. So now Comey and Clinton are saying two different things, but who's criminal here? Well, we all know that just by storing those emails on her private server, that was a breaking of the law. So why isn't she going to jail? Well, again, James Comey says, oh, well, she had no intent to break the law. She had no malicious or anti-American intent. So we're just going to let it slide for now. That seems to be kind of unreasonable, which it is. And it also seems to be preferential treatment, which it is, because they used to work together. So it makes sense. In fact, James Comey possibly has a connection to the Clinton Foundation as well, which doesn't surprise me either. But something that's big that's come out recently is the Podesta emails. The Podesta emails are something that have been talked about here recently. And the Podesta emails are emails that have been leaked from John Podesta, who's a American governmental worker. And he has, I think he's a senator actually, and he's really big into UFO disclosure. John Podesta is. UFO disclosure is the thing where government tells you that UFOs are a thing. Basically, that's it. But UFO disclosure is something that John Podesta is really into. And something that's interesting about his emails are he actually mentions ETIs, extraterrestrial individuals, I think, and he talks about how they're a thing and how we have a treaty with them. Now, is he crazy, or is this a code word for something else, which seems to be much more likely? It's all very strange. The Podesta emails are really odd. But there's also speculation that Justice Scalia may have been murdered. That's another thing that's come out thanks to the John Podesta emails. Justice Scalia, of course, is a noted conservative Supreme Court justice who was constantly making pretty decent decisions, actually, and unfortunately died. I think it was heart failure that he died of. Now, Justice Scalia has been sort of a conservative staple for a few years now. People have really looked up to him. People have been very much memorializing him post-mortem. And the idea that he may have been murdered, that's shocking to say the least, but it's also not surprising. It's one of those things where you're shocked, but you're also not terribly surprised either. The thing with Justice Scalia having been murdered, if that is what indeed happened, is the email is so it's so obscure, it's so difficult to decipher what's being said that you can't really make any determination one way or the other. But the email basically reads that there's some sort of wet works operation going on regarding Justice Scalia. Now, wet works, if you're not familiar with Black Ops vernacular, basically means a wet team goes in and kills somebody and leaves. It's kind of like a black bag operation. A black bag operation is where operatives go into a defined area, obtain something unnoticed, and leave unnoticed. That's a black bag operation. A wet works operation is where it's a team of people who are authorized to kill, essentially, and they do so without ever being detected. Now, why in the world would that be talked about in emails? I don't know, but it's all very suspicious, and it's something that's kind of interesting anyway. So if you have the chance, look into and read into Podesta emails and Justice Scalia wet works. It's all interesting stuff. Anyway, I'll put it that way. I'm not saying that he was killed or murdered, but I'm saying that it's interesting. I'll put it that way. It's something interesting to read about, no matter what you think about it. So the future of travel is heading our way. We always think about how we're going to travel in the future, and possibly more importantly, how are we going to travel in the future in a way that is actually affordable? Because with public transport, there's always the issue of it gets government money. Because public transport, well, gets a lot of government money, actually. I mean, think about CARTA, think about MARTA down in Atlanta, think about all the different ARTA entities, and think about Amtrak. It gets a lot of government subsidies and somehow derails and kills a lot of people. Anyway, these things are all publicly funded, or at least they get taxpayer money in one way or another. And one common theme with that is it's not very reliable, and it's dirty, and the people who are on it are not people you would necessarily want to be on a bus with most of the time. Well, there's a solution. Possibly, anyway. Hyperloop, which is a dream of Elon Musk, is getting public and private funding, and it's all very interesting, too. A $50 million investment from its Dubai backer, and they hired a former Google treasurer, too. Hyperloop One, a company which might soon introduce humans to a new era of epic high-speed travel inside an airspeed tube. It's in a vacuum. It's like a train inside of a vacuum, and it can go faster than the speed of sound. Just raised another $50 million. Uber's former financial executive is now on board as well, and the CEO, Rob Lloyd, says, "We're very proud to welcome our new investors, financial partners, and board members to those who already share our passion and commitment to develop the next mode of transportation that will eliminate the barriers of time and distance." Los Angeles-backed startup has won backing from Dubai's DP World Group, bringing its bank to $160 million since its founding in 2014. Now, note that this is all being done without, as far as we can tell anyway, very much, at least, government money. And something that has to be recognized about any kind of public venture is, one, government is essentially gambling with your money whenever there's a public venture of any kind, or a government investment, or endowment, or enabling of any kind of entity. Think about Solyndra, the whole debacle with Solyndra. Big outrage, right? Solyndra got a bunch of money from government subsidies, but those subsidies are basically your tax dollars that are being gambled on companies where governments just sort of hope that it works. I mean, what if government used your money and played, say, the slot machines in Las Vegas? They probably have better odds, actually, of making money with your tax money doing it that way than they would by putting it into different companies and startups and what have you. I mean, there's an endowment or a program for basically anything. And that's another display of the problem that we have with the national economy, where, yeah, there's solutions like Hyperloop, where Hyperloop is actually getting money from private backers, but eventually there's going to have to be government money somewhere, because Hyperloop is going to have to get permission from government to build. Hyperloop is going to have to get permission from local authorities to place their pipelines here and there and to use this amount of fuel, and there's going to have to be carbon tax credits and all sorts of other things, and it's going to be a whole big mess. But Hyperloop is more local, more not local, but more private than it is public, and that's a good thing for now. So a private bus system can work, a private public-ish transport system can work. It's just you have to do it right. And governments are not particularly good at governing business because look at how the country's being run. If the country was a business, it would have collapsed a long time ago. Probably sometime in the mid 1700s, it would have just, or sorry, the mid 1800s, it would have just collapsed because it wouldn't work very well. If a government is constantly in debt, it's obviously not pulling any money in. So why are they taxing all these people if they're so deeply in debt and don't seem to be able to dig themselves out of that hole? Seems to be kind of odd, isn't it? And another question is, if governments can just print all the money that they want, why are they taxing people anyway? Why do they need to take money away from us to fund projects that they want to fund when Senator so-and-so could just put in an order for $500 million to be printed up? That seems like it'd be the better solution, wouldn't it? Because then you wouldn't have to worry at all about, people being angry because you're taking their money from them. I don't know. Why not just print up the money if you need it so badly? And people say, oh, but inflation. Well, yeah, but you can design an economy around that, I'm sure. And besides, inflation's run rampant anyway. Why not have a controlled inflation with a benevolent AI running your monetary system? I mean, why not? If you're going to go all out, you may as well go all out. But that's the logic of governments, unfortunately. It's not particularly good. It really never is. And that's why national economy always collapses at some point or another. It has to. As soon as it founds itself, as soon as it's founded, I should say, it's going to collapse at some point. National economies are not built to last. And I don't know if the people who are in them know that or not, or if they care or not, because they're hoping that it'll collapse on someone else's term, not theirs. But national economies, the way that they're set up, they couldn't possibly last very long because you're trying to govern a bunch of different people in a bunch of different demographics who have a bunch of different ideas about how the country should be run. You can do that if you're in a local area. In Chattanooga, we mostly agree on what needs to be done. But in the country of the United States of America, most people don't agree on anything. I mean, look at how the political demographics are right now. Look at the election where it's basically split 50-50. And you have a few percentage points for the third parties. And no one ever talks about the Constitution Party for some reason, even though it's probably, if you're going to have a political party, it's probably the best one. But we'll just ignore that one for some reason because it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to get any media attention because that would be bad for the narrative. But when you look at the national demographics and when you look at how people are voting, obviously there's a pretty big divide in thought in America. But it's almost always exclusively based on states where you have very, very blue states like, say, California, which is a very much Democrat state. But then you have states like Tennessee, which are very, very Republican and want to be more conservative. And then you have states like Georgia, where if you draw a line and sort of slice out Atlanta from the state of Georgia, it's a very conservative state. But if you put Atlanta back in, it's a very liberal state. It's the problem with the big city. But Georgia's still, overall, a pretty conservative state. So if Georgia, say, was its own economy, if Georgia was its own country of some sort, it would probably function pretty well. Smaller countries, smaller states tend to fare pretty well. I mean, look at Switzerland. Switzerland's made a lot of really good decisions, and it seems to work out very well for Switzerland. Now, it's not perfect, but it's definitely not the worst either. Their economy is pretty good. Their currency is fiat, yeah, but Switzerland does have gold reserves and silver reserves, and that's actually kind of good, believe it or not. It actually kind of works. If Georgia had, say, more sovereignty, although I don't think states should have sovereignty in the way we think of it. Only God is sovereign. But if Georgia had power as an autonomous entity, it would probably do pretty well. And so would Tennessee. And a lot of the other coastal states would too. That's how the country was kind of set up originally anyway. The states were to be pretty much autonomous aside from just the mutual agreement of interstate commerce. And that was about it. A common currency, interstate commerce, and from there, sky's the limit. And that's the ultimate capitalistic idea of how the country was to be run. It was amazing. It was an enterprise. It was a good idea. But we've corrupted that so much over time, and we've focused so much on the national government, right? We've completely abandoned the idea that the founders had, and it was a very good idea, where the states were to be mostly autonomous. But we'll just throw that away because we need a strong national government. And the founding fathers, I think, really did understand, at least to some degree, local economy. or what we now call local economy. I think that they really did understand that, at least partially, how it worked and how it would work. That a national government does not function very well at all. I mean, remember, they're just coming out of the British Empire. They know national government does not work because it doesn't represent everyone very well. But a state government, just a small state, that could work. And I think that that's what they were thinking in their heads, is a national government doesn't work. But a state government, you could actually pull that off. If they're just bound with an agreement to interstate commerce, you could actually pull that off. And they did for a while. And then a few more presidents came in and ruined everything. And the Civil War happened and ruined things even more. And then you had the Federal Reserve Act, which ruined things even more. Basically, states need to be more autonomous from the national government. We'd be a lot better off. But we'd be even better off if individuals were nearly entirely autonomous. Can you imagine that? Self-government? That's a crazy idea. It's actually the best kind of government, though. Self-government. Gotta love it. This is Best Shot here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240, hotnewstalkradio.com. Colin Cowherd is coming up next here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240, and hotnewstalkradio.com. Like us on Facebook. Get us on Noogaradio.com, too.
Expect some passing clouds, but still dry and warm out there. High